This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Ladek, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in EdTech, a spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And OpenLMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver a highly effective, customized, and engaging learning experience for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hi there, I'm Ladek. This episode is part of a live real-time series that I recorded at the 2022 EDUCAUSE conference in Denver, Colorado. In this conversation, I speak with Chris Hoffman of UC Berkeley about the use of AR and VR in education, future-forward design, and what we might expect for how learning will be impacted around this in the near term. And just a quick reminder, you can make sure to never miss an episode of the podcast by subscribing at elearnmagazine.com. Now, I give you Chris.
All right, folks, we're back here at EDUCAUSE. I'm Ladek. This is Chris Hoffman. Just remind me where you're from.
University of California. UC Berkeley. University of California.
We're going to talk about VR and AR.
Sure. It's one of my projects that I really love working on. Absolutely.
Well, I think I reached out to you because that's the presentation you're giving, right? It's what's the topic specifically around VR and AR that you're looking at?
We've been taking the kind of AR and VR technologies and looking at them through a futures framework. So instead of kind of just doing a general kind of strategic planning and kind of listening to pundits, we're actually applying a futures framework to develop scenarios and signals that we can kind of pay attention to. So we're talking about
you're going to have to educate me on what a futures framework is, because I hate it when somebody throws something on the table that I don't know. But what does that mean?
Well, a futures framework is actually developed, out of higher education, out of some kind of corporate, consulting companies. Started in the Bay Area, actually, with the Holder Catalog is kind of a hippie tech movement that was out in the Bay Area.
Oh my Lord!
This was kind of an outgrowth of that in the '80s. They kind of evolved into this what was called the Global Business Network, and then into the other companies like Institute for Future Thinking. I'm actually forgetting the name, IFTF. But they kind of, over the last 30 years, they've developed a whole methodology around developing scenarios, looking at trends, and it's actually demonstrated by research that they're on to an interesting approach.
Wow, cool. And so what is this, when you say you're approaching VR and AR and XR through a future framework, you're basically, do you look 5 years out? Do you look 15 years out? Does that time frame matter?
And the futures framework thinking is very interesting because they talk about 10 years as actually being kind of a magical number, right? It's far enough out that, there are changes that happen. You look at things from a decade on.
Think about how different you and I were 10 years ago,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. And at the same time, you're not as wedded. You think about something you might do in 3 years or 5 years, you still kind of have some ownership of that. In 10 years, you're kind of like, hey, whatever, let's explore this. So you're much less kind of tied to some preconceptions. Okay. So 10 years is actually a good kind of time frame to think about to do these kind of features things.
And when you're looking at the future framework, let's just keep it within like the construct of VR.
Yeah.
You're thinking, how is this being applied? You're thinking, is this a part of everyday life? Are those the kind of thought games that you get to play? Or?
Yeah, you actually develop different scenarios. Based on whether you think change will be conservative or incremental or dramatic, and whether you think the impact of those changes in your sphere will be minimal or medium or high impact. So you develop different scenarios, and you actually then look at the kind of signals that you should be paying attention to see like what kind of futures might be emerging. And simultaneously, with those scenarios, you can say, that's a scenario I want to aim towards, or that's like something I'd like to avoid. So it also helps you identify actions that you can take right now.
Super cool. So take me to some of your scenarios. Like, can you put them on the table here? Is there a way to describe them?
Well, the full talk is on Thursday, and it's really my colleague Owen McGrath from UC Berkeley who's really developed these. But we've developed scenarios where I think our favorite scenarios that we think are probably happening. There will be incremental change, and it might be low impact or high impact. There's so many unknowns right now. Some of it has to do with technology. AR glasses are going to come out. Will that be kind of very disruptive? Will it be disruptive in higher education, or will kind of conservative status quo forces that do exist on our campuses, will they kind of inhibit the change actually taking place on our campus? So will higher ed be a follower in these technologies? So this is when you start aspiring to what you would like to do to kind of shape what kind of scenario might emerge.
How are your scenarios informed by what has already happened in VR today?
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, let's just keep in the learning space right now. We know that it's fundamentally changing how, for instance, like a lot of corporate safety training is happening. Right. I'm thinking firefighting, like really high risk, super high impact. Got to get it right the first time.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily want to have fires every day to train. That kind of stuff. So we know that it's having certain impact in a lot of different ways.
Right.
How does that inform the future?
Absolutely, yeah. So, for instance, if you look at what's happening in medical schools, where they've really, taken to these technologies more than probably other education kind of domains. Yeah, med schools are really using this to develop surgery techniques. It's the same thing. It's something you want people to be good at, but you don't want them to have to practice on live people that much, right? So you want, there are new techniques, whether it's surgery or nursing, even policing, where people are learning like empathy training through a more immersive virtual reality kind of experience. So we're definitely looking at those trends, and what's happening on the ground right now is absolutely very important. And that's where there's so much change happening. And what we see in higher education, aside from things like med schools and things like training firefighters or disaster response, it seems to be more. There are exceptions, of course, but kind of pockets of excellence. Right? We've got at UC Berkeley, we have an amazing professor in the School of Architecture who's developing VR applications. She has a lab, and she's really kind of at the cutting edge, at least on our campus. There's some great hardware development going on in the College of Engineering, and then software development too. How do you recognize space in real time using these sensors? But they're isolated, and they collaborate more with people at other universities in their field than they do with other people on campus. So one of the things that we're trying to do is really bring those, what we call the pockets of excellence, together so they can inform each other. And so at the same time, we can then promote the importance of some values that are important to us, things like accessibility, things like security and privacy, interoperability, and being able to reuse a 3D model that was created for documentation purposes in a VR application, in a virtual classroom experience. And these are kind of things that, I work with a central service provider organization, Research Teaching and Learning, and those are things that we think about. How would we actually support this at scale and addressing the things that we know are important, like accessibility, super important on our campus. So we can't just let that evolve chaotically. We need to try to steer the ship a little bit.
How is your work informed by the only thing that's popping into my head right now, but is the gaming community. I'm thinking of the Fortnites of the world, the Minecrafts of the world, etc. These large scale kind of universes that people spend an awful lot of time in.
Right.
Is that 2D, 3D world a part of this conversation? Even though it's not a device, or maybe I guess. Yeah, I'm just thinking now that you can actually play like Minecraft 3D in a virtual setting as well. So
right. Well, yeah, and that's where kind of the student connection comes in. Right? So Berkeley, like many other universities, has what used to be the VR club and is now an XR club. So a student club that's
called the XR club now.
It's called the XR club. So, they have groups of students developing projects. Most of them are around developing a game. That ends up being one of the more straightforward projects to do. A lot of the development is happening in game development engines like Unity and Unreal, thank you. Yeah, so that has allowed us, engaging with students is something that we've been doing and forming our community of practice. So we've brought in students who, they've been gaming all their lives, and we've been asking them to, do things like go into a social metaverse, a social XR metaverse application. What do they like about it? What don't they like about it? And we've asked them to think about it from the context, from the perspective of being in a class. How would this work for you in a classroom setting or a small group setting? Yeah. So yes, absolutely. And it's through that engagement with students that we're really hearing. They know more about what's going on, and certainly more about what students want out of these kinds of technologies.
So you kind of thinking of that future scenario, that future forward-looking scenario. What are some of the if this in order to achieve this, these things have to happen, and you can either look at it as from a positive light of these are the paths we have to take, or these are the barriers that have to be overcome.
Yeah.
Like what are some of those barriers that you've either discovered or you've hypothesized?
Yeah. Well, one of the ones that I'm really interested in is kind of security and privacy. Right. So these technologies, as you start wearing these headsets and wearing different kinds of sensors and hand controllers, and the next generation of some of these headsets is some of them is going to have like 14 cameras on them. Right?
I think the one my son has is like 10 right now. It's
so
crazy.
The amount of data that they're gathering, not only about us and
the space you live in,
exactly. So they're gathering a lot of data and using it both to make the experience better, which is great. But what else are they doing with the data? And higher education has been kind of the victim, I would say, or has not paid attention to kind of the terms and conditions and agreements with vendors. And often it's because we don't actually have control. It's something a student has decided to use or a teacher has decided to use, and then momentum grows, and all of a sudden we find out that, actually, all these amazing privacy issues that exist. And I think a lot of people in the virtual reality and augmented reality space are really concerned as well. And how do we make sure that we have some principles, that we have that people are aware of just how identifiable their data is becoming from working with these technologies. So again, if you think about that from a university perspective, like from a service provider, you just can't ignore that.
Sure. And what? I mean, do those councils exist? Are there committees? Are there government? I guess it wouldn't be government bodies, but at least global associations or international associations like this. Or
there are some policy groups in the U.S. and international. IEEE is interested in this topic. There are some. You'll see various articles where people have said, like, okay, the metaverse needs to be open. There needs to be one metaverse, not many. And right now, all of this is very vendor-driven. Right? You have the Microsoft metaverse. You have the Facebook metaverse. Right? Everybody has their own metaverse. Think about it. Compare it to the beginning of the internet. Right, where there was such a passion about this being a shared, open space, and of course now we see what's happened, but at least it had that foundation where really, maybe there's still one internet, conceptually maybe there is, but the metaverse right now is so kind of vendor fragmented that that's a key kind of difference.
How does someone experience that? I mean, I don't know if you can speak to that, but some people talk about, holy smokes, the term has just gone right out of my head, where access to services and those kinds of things. There's a lot of lobbying efforts from internet service providers to basically say, look, I want to be able to throttle control and provide those kinds of things, which then the right to access becomes an issue. Right. What are some of the key things around that, if you're able to speak to it, that people should be concerned about, or maybe people need to think about?
Yeah. Well, great question. I mean, I think just in terms of making these things work. Right now, they're hard to use, right? The equipment's hard to use. It's heavy on your head. I think technology we'll see some technology innovations that make the technology more usable. Already we've seen costs are dropping, so there's increasing adoption. But I think the kind of vendor fragmentation and the security issues and data privacy issues are the ones that I really worry about. In terms of kind of just bandwidth and limiting bandwidth, this stuff. Everybody's saying that 5G is going to be a great enabler for these technologies. Maybe it will.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I went to it's interesting to see what some people with a lot of money are doing with some of these technologies. In the Bay Area right now, there's a big warehouse that's been converted into a virtual reality space, and you put on a Quest 2 headset, and you can walk through the International Space Station. And there is, for the Quest 2, there is a virtual reality tour of the space station, but this is different because you can actually walk.
Moving.
It's in a large physical space like the space we're in here, and I'm pretty sure they're using 5G as part of this to really you can interact, go into different scenes very quickly. It's very smooth. There were some bugs.
And the 5G, the whole thing about 5G is that it enables the volume of data in order to refresh and just make the experience real.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Because the technologies are still just not, they're immersive compared to looking at a computer screen.
Of course, yeah.
But they're still glitchy and heavy on your, come out with a dent in your forehead, these kinds of things. Yeah.
They make me dizzy. I don't know. Every time I put my sons on, they make me car sick. So.
I can go for about an hour and 15 minutes, and I'm ready for a break now. Yeah.
So let's talk about. Let's. I think we have a few minutes left here. Yeah. Let's talk about adoption. In is this going to be a leapfrog moment? Because I have a hard time seeing. I'm going to call myself old, but my generation giving two hoots about VR. You know what I mean? I think it's right now. It's a gimmick. It's something that's that our kids use, those kinds of things. But we're still a very large part of the global population.
Yeah.
What does that look like in terms of in your future scenario? Is there a critical hockey moment? Like a hockey stick moment where adoption just becomes a thing?
No, I think it's going to be very gradual, very incremental. And one of the things it says to us as service providers is that even if we do come up with ways to provide some content in a Quest or a headset, we also have to make sure that works in a computer on a 2D screen, right? Because even if a lot of people get headsets and you start creating content specifically for that, you still have to support the many people who will not have that. So I think in terms of that's kind of one of our principles. That, it's like many of these social XR environments or metaverse environments, many of them do support both a kind of a general computer login through the web, but some of them don't. Like you really have to have the headset or you can't participate. So that's an issue for us. And I lost the thread of the question there.
It was basically adaptability and sort of like, will there be a hockey stick moment where we start to see VR everywhere, and even going into a grocery store, it's going to be a VR experience, that kind of stuff.
The one thing that I think has some real potential is AR glasses. Like if you get some augmented reality glasses that are lightweight and people aren't freaking out too much about the privacy issues. But then what it comes down to is content, right? So you have this great, and people in higher education are talking about this a lot, that, you can get content that's provided by these vendors, or you can get games, but the experiences that are really related to learning are far and few and far between, right? Mm-hmm. And that actually puts kind of the pressure on us in higher education to create the content that matters to higher education. And the content creation part is expensive and hard and requires very specialized skills. So how we get there to a point where we have enough content where it will bring people to these technologies that want to use them, that could be a very long time. And the risk is if we don't at least start to do it now, the risk is that companies will do it for us. So
Which think about has happened in so many other sectors in so many different ways. I mean, when you don't understand something, the person who's created it starts to write the rules, and they become self-advantageous. And
if you think about augmented reality glasses, if you're walking around on a campus and you want to provide some augmented experiences on your campus, Do you want Facebook, Meta to be doing that, or how do we guide that process too, where people would be able to see like, oh yeah, the library is open. It's here's the direction to that space, or to the student club gathering or something like that, as opposed to advertisements for I don't know. You name your product, energy drink or something like that, hanging above you in your library. Just massive.
Library brought to you by Coca-Cola.
Yeah,
there you
exactly.
Go. Awesome.
Well, they might need that actually. A little extra funding.
So, as someone who, final question, someone who's looked forward, thought about AR and VR really hard, what are you most excited about? Like, what gets you going, and you're like, this is gonna be really cool.
Yeah. Well, I think it's that immersive experience where you can be places and experiencing things that you couldn't otherwise. Mm-hmm. And I think higher education is so full of stories that can be brought to life in really exciting ways. I've worked a lot with archaeologists, and that's actually what my degree is in. And archaeology stories are just waiting to be told. I worked on a VR application with some Egyptologists, and I think it's just one of the coolest things out there. When I compare it to what is available on the Oculus stores, this is something that was developed by a couple of Egyptologists, one at Berkeley, one at Santa Cruz. It brings together their research and gets people excited about the past.
Sure.
So it's about the stories that we want to tell in higher education. I think it's a great format.
Chris, sorry, I almost felt like a Peter Hoffman. I don't know why. Chris, thank you so much for coming by today. I really
enjoyed it.
Thanks again for joining me for the eLearn podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. Just push subscribe on your player right now. And remember, you can join the conversation live on YouTube, Facebook, and my LinkedIn feed every week. I hope to see you there. Thanks.